Hi, my name is Andre Coleman. Welcome to Pasadena Votes 2018 Measures I and J. Over the past few months, there's been so much noise about the November 6th election, both nationally and locally. Today, we're going to talk about that election, but we're going to talk about the local measures that impact Pasadena residents. Joining me here to help us do that, to my right, District 2 residents and Planning Commissioner Felicia Williams, and Pasadena Mayor Terry Tornek. Welcome.
Thank you.
So talk to us first about what's on the ballot.
Well, there are two questions. It's interesting, Andre, that you introduced this as being so important. Part of our concern is that these two local measures are so far at the bottom of the ballot that the experts are telling us that 10 or 15% of the people won't ever make it down to the local measures. And it's ironic because those measures, in a lot of ways, are the most important things in terms of affecting people's lives locally. So if they do work their way down to the bottom of the ballot after all the state measures and the judges and all the other stuff
voter fatigue
in between, what they will find is Measure I, which authorizes the imposition of an additional 3/4 cent sales tax. That's 75 cents on a $100 purchase. To be used for city budgetary purposes, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. And then Measure J, which is a companion measure, which is an advisory measure that says if Measure I passes, that the voters agree that the City Council should share that 3/4 cent with the Pasadena Unified School District. So the school district would get 1/3 of that, or 1/4 cent, and the city would retain the rest. That amounts to, each 1/4 cent is worth about $7 million a year. So that would, if both measures pass, it would mean $14 million a year to the city of Pasadena and $7 million a year to the school district.
Wow.
Okay. And so many voters are wondering why this is on the ballot now, with 10 other cities in November going out for a sales tax that's similar, and 15 cities did it in 2016. Why is the city of Pasadena having this on the ballot measure now?
You know, I can't speak to the unique circumstances that may apply, in all the other cities, but I've been on the council. I was on the council for 6 years before I was elected to be mayor, and one of the first things I did when I was elected is I asked then Mayor Bill Bogard to appoint me to the Finance Committee, which he did. Not many people clamor for that assignment. But I did that because I'm a business person and because I had also been a department head in the city as a planning director when I first came to town. And I knew very well that it's really the dollars, the availability of dollars, that drive everything else. There are lots of people with lots of good ideas, appropriate ideas about the way the city should be spending its money. But if we don't have the money, we can't act on it. And unlike the federal government, we don't get to print money if we're short. So we have to live within our means. Right. And I thought that since the Finance Committee was charged with the responsibility of at least outlining the budget, that's a place that I wanted to be. And so we began to do our budgeting on a 5-year basis. Because it's been our experience that to do budgeting a year at a time really doesn't make any sense. And the trend lines in terms of how the revenue was proceeding and how the expenses were proceeding became pretty clear, that the trend lines were going to cross and the expenses were going to outstrip revenue. And this is the year where that's going to happen. And
so we're at that point right now.
We're at that point. We're barely breaking even this year. And it's worse than that, really, because that's on an operating basis. I'm talking about the operating budget, the so-called general fund. What makes it even worse is that we've got a lot of deferred maintenance. We haven't been keeping up in terms of the capital expenditures for the city in terms of maintaining the streets and the sewers and the lights and the basic, not very sexy, but very vital infrastructure. And so apart from the fact that on an operating basis we're struggling to keep our head above water, we're only doing that on the basis of deferring maintenance and replacement of our infrastructure. And so the lion's share of the $14 million, frankly, if this passes, at least in the early years, the lion's share of that money will be used on capital improvements We've got 8 fire stations. Only 2 of them are really up to code. We had a lecture yesterday from our superintendent of public works, our director of public works, Ira Maloyan, who documented to us that our streets, we're paving a couple of miles of street a year. We need to be paving at least 3 times as many miles. And that kind of thing, while not obvious on the face of it, catches up with you over time. And so we just don't have the wherewithal to do what we should be doing as responsible stewards of our city.
So the positive then is if this passes, you can take care of the day-to-day, the infrastructure things. What else? What else would be the positives here?
Well, I mean, those are the positives. The positives are that if it doesn't pass, we're going to have a conversation as part of the coming year's budget discussion about what it is we're going to be cutting. Pasadena's residents have an expectation of a pretty high level of service. And so the reality is that we have done a fair amount of cutting already. We have reduced our workforce by a couple of hundred people. We have, and in all the departments, we've reduced the police force by 20 people, and this year we defunded another 5 police officer positions. Public safety is more than half of our operating budget. And so the conversation, if this doesn't pass, will be about how do we achieve the reductions, because we don't have enough money, and those will not be fun discussions. One of the most expensive parts of our budget has to do with emergency medical services. The fire department, 80% of the fire department's calls are medical calls. They're not to put out fires. The fires are the most dramatic part of the job, but 80% of the calls are medical calls. And we provide what they call advanced level services. Glendale, by comparison, provides what they call basic level services. It's a lot cheaper. The personnel, not as many personnel respond. They're not necessarily as well trained and not as well paid as a result. And often they're not firefighters. And so we can do that. I mean, what we have now is really sort of a Cadillac, or maybe I should say Lexus level of service. And so one of the conversations that we'll have to have is that an appropriate, can we afford to maintain that level of service? Right. I'll tell you that from a personal point of view, as a more senior person, that if I have chest pains, I want to be sure that the people that respond in a hurry, that there are enough of them there, and that they're well trained enough right. to make sure I make it to the hospital alive. And I think most people feel that way, but nothing will be immune from scrutiny in terms of having to find ways to save money. And so we'll just have to take a hard look at that along with everything else.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to add for the voters?
Well, I think that nobody likes talking about higher taxes. It's not necessarily a positive political career choice right. to come, as George Bush Sr. discovered, to come to the voters and say, we think we need to raise taxes. The fact that this was a unanimous vote by the Pasadena City Council, that all my colleagues stepped up and agreed that we had reached the point where we needed to do this, mm-hmm. I think is symptomatic of the fact that we really need to do this. Mm-hmm. We have had a series of informational budgetary meetings. There are a series of meetings in all of the districts to explain to people why we feel we've gotten to this point and what the future holds in store. And so people can be informed. There's a city website. If you go to the city website, there's an explanation of some of the information that I've just talked about with some more specifics. And of course, we're available for questions from any resident that wants to send us an email or ask a question. But I think that while this will not be a popular move, I think part of the reason, going back to your earlier point, Felicia, that you see so many cities making this move is that over the past couple of years, there have been a series of county sales tax measure increases. And when those happen, and the most recent was Measure H for homeless financing, for programs for the homeless, and I think we probably all voted for it. The problem with that is that Pasadena, it's a quarter cent. So it's $7 million that's collected in Pasadena, the same as what we've been talking about. Pasadena has paid into that fund for 2 years. We've paid in about $7 million a year, $14 million. We haven't been allocated any money yet because the county was a little slow getting off the starting gate. But we're getting our first allocation for the first 2 years, and it's going to be a little over $1 million. So the math is not good. 14 million in,
Wow.
1 million out. Long Beach, by contrast, was already at the maximum sales tax at the 10 1/4. So when Measure H passed, no additional sales tax was imposed on Long Beach because they were already at the statutory maximum. So Long Beach has paid in $0. Long Beach is getting out $2 million. So 0 in,
2 million.
2 out. We've 14 in and 1 out. I mean, and so effectively, our money is going to Long Beach.
Right.
And Long Beach has a homeless problem. I don't resent the fact that they have funding for homeless services, but what's happening is a kind of a dramatic redistribution of Pasadena sales tax income, and we can't sustain that. We can't allow that to happen. Pasadena, in the 5 sales tax measures, countywide sales tax measures, most of them are transportation measures, that have passed in the past few years, Pasadena gets 17% back on what it pays in. So even if you're not enthusiastic about the notion of having a higher sales tax, it's a pretty good bet that there will be additional county sales taxes introduced. And it's an equally good bet that Pasadena will not be getting its fair share.
And so with our measures, the money stays home.
100%. So it's sort of a no-brainer. I mean, from that point of view, it's 100% versus 17%. So even if you're not an enthusiastic supporter of sales taxes, I think keeping the money at home is a pretty compelling argument. I've been sort of test driving these arguments, as I move around the city. And as I go door to door campaigning for this measure, and even people who are dubious about the idea, once they understand, because this in and out money business is a little harder to absorb. Once they get it, after their initial shock, can that be right? That's the initial reaction. They tend to look upon the measures in a more favorable light.
So talk to me about going door to door on this thing.
Well, I just started. I was waiting to have some literature in my hand. I like to go walk with fact sheets, and we've produced that literature. We're going to be mailing every week now to people, so they'll be seeing some of that literature in their mailboxes. But there were a couple of things that I was trying to find out. I was trying to find out whether there was awareness of these measures. Do people even know that there's a Measure I and a Measure J?
And do they?
Not yet.
Oh.
They're programs like this and the mail that we're sending will help them become aware of it. And a lot of people don't start to look at their voter pamphlets until it gets closer, but people have the ballots, are starting to get their ballots, their mail ballots now. So they're going to all of a sudden be paying more attention. I was also looking for the reaction to how they felt about it and whether or not they had questions on why we're doing it. Of course they did. And on a one-on-one basis, it's relatively easy to explain the rationale. Not that it's absolutely persuasive in every case, but at least people understand what the drivers are. And then I was also interested in seeing the reaction to Measure J, which is the companion piece, the school piece. 40% of the people in Pasadena send their kids to private school, more than 40%. And it's been my experience in earlier campaigns, for council and for mayor, that even people who have no connection with the public school system are supportive of the public school system and are aware of the fact that you can't have a really first-class city unless you have a first-class public school system, and that it ultimately benefits them as well. If a company is thinking of relocating to Pasadena, they want to know what the quality of the public schools are. It affects property values. I mean, there are a lot of ways in which having a first-rate school system benefits everybody in the community, whether they have kids in the school or not. And that's still true. People understand and are generally sympathetic. The public school, as difficult as financing is for us, for the city government, the public school system and financing arrangement in the state of California really is almost unbelievable. The schools don't know from year to year how much money they're even going to get. And there are corrections made even in the middle of the school year. So you do your budget, we're talking about 5-year budgetary processes. They're talking about a situation where year to year they can't be confident, and on a 6-month basis they get corrections. The Pasadena Unified School District has a significant cohort of special needs kids. They're supposed to get supplementary reimbursement to support special needs kids. The state and federal government have never hit the benchmarks in terms of what they had committed to in terms of funding special needs kids. So a disproportionate amount of their budget is spent supporting special needs kids, and the same is true for foster youth. So you've got a school district that can't do coherent budgetary planning going forward, is confronted with sort of erratic funding streams, and never has gotten their fair share in terms of the special needs and foster kids, and is confronted with a formula that's predicated on enrollment, and they have declining enrollments because enrollments are declining statewide.
Right.
So it's not unique to PUSD, but the formula is built on enrollment, and this year they've lost almost 500 kids. So they've got almost a perfect storm of challenges in terms of their financial condition, and happily, again, my colleagues on the council agreed that we need to step up and at least ask the voters for permission to share any additional sales tax revenue with the PUSD.
And that's Measure J.
That's Measure J.
Okay.
So J is irrelevant if I doesn't pass.
Okay.
But we're supporting both measures.
And I did want to pick up on another item that you had, to the question of why now. But the state has a sales tax limit of 10 1/4.
Yes.
Right, and so you have the state, and then you also have the county measures, and that has brought us up to 9.5
Right.
cents. So, so is that also a timing issue, that there's only about 3/4 of a cent left?
That's exactly my
with the
point,
state
and that's
cap?
why all these cities, I think, have probably put the measures, because they all recognize that if they don't strike first, that the county will gobble up that remaining 3/4 of a cent, and they'll never have another shot.
Yeah.
Long Beach, Santa Monica, and some other cities sort of figured this out before. They were smart. They were ahead of the curve. But the argument that says Pasadena won't be competitive, Pasadena businesses won't be competitive because we'll be at 10 1/4, and some other surrounding communities, not Glendale or Burbank, will be still at 9.5. That's a short-term gap. I'm pretty confident that the county will gobble up that remaining 3/4 cent, and you'll see it uniformly across Los Angeles County that everybody's at the 10 1/4 maximum.
So in more than one way, this is a now or never situation.
That's right. That's why you had a unanimous vote of the city council, because we recognize that apart from the curves dictating when we ought to be doing this, the reality, the taxation reality. We looked at a bunch of different taxes. The sales tax was not the only consideration. We looked at parcel taxes. We looked at a combination of bonding measures. We looked at a gross receipts tax. I mean, there are lots of...
hotel tax, and our
Well, the
hotel
hotel
tax is
tax
one of the highest.
exists, yeah, and we've sort of
In
maxed out on
California,
that.
yeah.
So we really, once you reach the conclusion that you need more money, the question is, how can you cut? That's on how do you control on the expense side? We think we've wrung out pretty much what we can wring out before people start to really notice. And then the question is, where do you raise additional funds? And this is the conclusion is this was the most appropriate way to go at it.
Now, if the voters want to reach you to get more information, what is your email address?
Well, the best place to reach me on this issue, because I'm advocating and not wanting to use city resources, is yesonINJ.com, or they can email me directly at ttornek@charter.net, and I'll answer their questions.
And the city's website, cityofpasadena.net, you can get more information there. We implore you to educate yourselves on the taxes and the measures, and get as much information as possible. Attend a meeting, contact your councilman, but by all means, educate yourself on the matter. November 6th, right around the corner.
6th, at the very bottom of the ballot.
Yeah.
Yes.
So everybody's
Keep
got to
turning the
pledge that
page.
they're willing to
Yeah, the
get
voter
past the
fatigue.
judges
Yeah,
and all the
keep
measures
going.
and get down to the bottom of the ballot.
Well, thank you for joining us. For Mayor Tornek and Felicia Williams, I'm Andre Coleman. Have a good day.